Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Teagle, founding director of the Manetti Shrem Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program. While the UC Davis campus remains in a state of reduced operations and we're not able to greet you at the museum, we continue to live our mission by bringing the conversation to you. Before today's program begins, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which the museum stands. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Ketchildehe Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzaldehe Wintun Nation, and Yochadehe Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Thank you to all of our partners and collaborators, and thank you for joining us today in this virtual gathering space. Now, on to the program.
Hello, and welcome to the first lecture of the 2020-2021 Art Studios Visiting Artist Lecture Series. My name is Mercy Hawkins, and I'm a second-year Art Studio graduate student and graduate coordinator of this series. I would like to thank the department head, Annabeth Rosen, series chair, Shiva Ahmadi, and the Manetti Shrem Museum for making this event possible. This series was put together by a committee of Art Studio faculty members who chose artists based on suggestions from the graduate students and faculty. Each visiting artist spends a day with the Art Studio graduate students, offering studio advice and individual feedback, currently via our virtual space in Zoom. We have many exciting artists coming this year who work in a wide variety of mediums. We hope that this series will provide students, staff, professors, and museum visitors with an insightful look into innovative artist practices. All lectures will take place here via Zoom webinar at 4:30 on Thursdays throughout the year. Our next lecture features curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, author and media artist Rita Gonzalez, here December 10th. You can find a full list of this year's visitors on the Art Studio events webpage. A question and answer period will immediately follow the lecture. Please feel free to type questions in the Q&A chat box throughout the lecture. I now give a warm welcome to Department Chair Annabeth Rosen, who will introduce tonight's artist, Kyle Dunn. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Thanks Mercy, thanks Shiva, thanks committee and all grad students, and our gracious host, the Manetti Shrem Museum. Kyle Dunn makes masterful works, staged and highly stylized, full of suspense and melodrama, film noirish. They are full of longing and the expression of love and loneliness. Equally emotionally charged, contorted figures, and deeply personal work, understood equal parts beauty and difficulty. Born in Michigan, Dunn lives in Queens. He went to school in Geneva, Switzerland, and at the Maryland Institute College of Art, graduating in 2012. He has work, interviews, and reviews published in The New Yorker in 2017, Art Maze, published in London in 2018, The New Art Examiner, and Art Forum, also in 2018. He has upcoming shows in Gallery Maria Bernheim in Switzerland and PPOW in New York. We are thoroughly pleased to warmly welcome Kyle Dunn to UC Davis today. Please welcome Kyle Dunn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for everyone for hosting me today. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen for the slideshow. Just 1 second. So is that all good? Okay. Okay, so thanks to everyone for coming. I'm very excited to be here. I wish I were in California with you all, but this year is unlike any other. As Annabeth said, I studied sculpture at MICA in Baltimore. I graduated in 2012 and I moved to New York right after that, and I've been in New York since. I studied sculpture at school and I started showing in 2016, off and on, and only started working full-time in the studio in 2018. So I had quite a long time of making work outside of, working full-time as an art handler in the city and, making sculpture on the side after hours. When you're in school, I made a lot of metal fabrications, these large perforated steel, lacy kind of structures. And after school, you have to figure out how you can continue to make work with these pared down set of tools and in, whatever facilities you have. I was using a corner of my living room when I first moved here, and you can't have a oxyacetylene torch in a spare room. So I transitioned from sculpture to painting. It was a several year long process. And it took a long time for me to develop the particular relationship with the materials that I use to eventually get to the bas-relief sculptures that you can see here. In retrospect, the period was very productive for me because nobody was seeing the work. I was making it and I had a lot of time to explore in the studio and to figure out what worked best for me. And sometimes it's necessary to make ugly work or stupid work that's just out of the light, So yeah, and these two paintings, I'll come back to these later. You'll see them fully painted, but this is just a shot of them in the studio before the paint, so you can get a better idea of how they exist in 3D. This larger one on the side with the standing figure is about 4 by 5 feet. This piece is the same size, 4 by 5 feet. As far as just the overarching themes in my work, I think Annabeth's summary was pretty accurate. An overarching theme for me has been male sensuality interspliced with this kind of dark humor, and different facets of that, whether it be anxiety, joy, romance, melancholy, they come through in varying levels depending on where I am in my life and what I haven't tried or what I want to try next. Painting for me is a way to, it's autobiographical often, but it's also a way to fantasize and to explore things and to boil things down in my life. Making kind of order out of the chaos of living and going through the world. I'm constantly collecting images from all over to use in my work. Because I don't come from a painting background, I've found myself looking at found photography, film stills quite a bit, especially 1970s Italian giallo horror films like by Dario Argento and his lot. There's vintage interior design photography as well. They're often these kind of like empty sets that you can project onto. And I'm just constantly roving with my cell phone camera, taking pictures of, a neighbor's balustrade or a sunset through tree branches, what have you. And when I bring it all back into the painting, it's this way to translate everything into the same painting idiom that I use. So with that kind of general outline of the work, this is from my solo show in New York in 2018, which was called Always. The show was largely romantic in a kind of self-consciously staged or theatrical way. The pose in this is roughly inspired by Cupid and Psyche, which is a sculpture by Canova in the Metropolitan Museum. It's a beautiful sculpture, and she has her hands above her head, and he is coming in between her arms in this kind of like key and keyhole kind of way. It's very sweet, but has this kind of erotic undertone to the pose. And this is the first piece that I use this scenic wallpaper in the background. I found this as a kind of way to have my cake and eat it too when it comes to painting. I was often painting these interior scenes, and it was a way to incorporate still life painting, actual objects in the foreground with this kind of landscape painting. It appealed to me as well for being somewhat akin to set backdrops for a play. And there's this kind of high artifice about it where it feels like a scenic backdrop, and sometimes it's more clear that it's a pattern on a wall than others. And the title of the piece is Raft, both explicitly for this figure in the back, the raft in the background in the wallpaper, but also the swooning figure in the foreground kind of has the air, I thought, of someone in a shipwreck or being pulled from the water. This is High Tide. And this is, I kind of think of this as like a Hardy Boys painting. There's something about the imagery that reminds me of old Americana, but it's this kind of supplicant figure crawling towards his lover on the beach. And this show that I had at Goldberg, it kind of set up a couple formal things that I kept repeating, and but in a way trying to perfect them or use them differently. And in this one, this lantern in the foreground that has a directional light was something that I used a couple more times, and I still do. It's to structure the compositions, having a light in the center and connected to the focal point in the painting. It just structures the space. And I think this is the only fully still life painting I've ever done as an adult. It's kind of an outlier from the show. It was taking the scenic wallpaper thing further and kind of making a fourth wall where there's an actual forest outside and there's a forest, a fake forest on the wall, and there's this kind of implied violence with the window being broken. And at the same time, the window is something like a picture on the wall. At the time, I was an art handler, and we had moved a bunch of really fabulous Elizabeth Murray paintings, and I think some of those silhouettes kind of worked their way into my painting here unconsciously. Oops, sorry, I went one too far. So, home reno. This, growing up in Michigan, I watched a lot of Tool Time. It's one of those sitcoms where there's like kind of the clueless father with Tim Allen. My dad is a general contractor, and rather than hire a babysitter, used to take us on building sites. So I've been around this kind of stuff my whole life, and I wear Tims a lot. But it's just this kind of parody of this kind of macho man character, but also mixed with something that's so so gay, interior design and home renovation. And there's kind of like a, you know, inherent contrast there. So in the pose, you know, he's sitting on this sawhorse, and there's this kind of his genitals being so close to the nails, and this feeling of, you know, sitting on rough wood, and there's this kind of like psychosexual charge to it. I really love the work of Paul Arago's early paintings, especially The Family. If there's like one painting I could own in this world. But they're just these kind of very strange domestic scenes that nothing is explicitly wrong, but there's this kind of feeling of menace in the air, or it's quite ambivalent what's going on in them. This is Cooking Together. I had a series of works from this show that I liked the idea of a couple doing something together, and their arms are intertwined, and they're kind of losing their individuality and becoming one person while doing this activity, whatever it may be. It's something that I've kind of realized with, as I've kept working through time, that I love the idea of picking like a specific activity that has props and inherent objects that go with it. Kind of a similar logic to like a prop on in a play that holds narrative information, but they're often people like in Home Reno, where he was sitting on the sawhorse. They're using them incorrectly, or they're contorted around the objects, and they're kind of interacting with the implied narrative that just comes with the objects themselves. Such here, there's the cake that they're feeding each other, and the knife and the banana. This is another one in that series. This is a couple on the beach. This man in a kind of sheriff's hat. I'm not entirely privy to my thinking when I made this painting, but oops, I went one too far. So this is Bao, and Bao was in like the crook of a tree. Excuse me. I made this composition, and there's kind of a doubling of the figure's legs in the tree that are two opposite, going this way and that way. And I kind of want it to be as if the spotlight is on him and he's shirking the responsibility of being looked at in the painting. Like he's trying to get out of frame and like lean away from you as the viewer. And this, I think, this is Hot Lava. This is the first large multi-figure painting. I found as I've worked over time that, historically, if you think of like big history painting, allegory and metaphor are often carried by these large multi-figure compositions. And, there's all these moving parts that make the story. And I've found the opposite to be true in my studio. I find it easier to have one figure who's kind of being subsumed into their surroundings, and it's more of a, it feels more like a subjective dream state where you're there alone. And I have a lot more trouble in wrapping my head around multi-figure compositions. This one is, depending on where you grew up, it's hot lava or the floor is lava. It's that kid's game where you can't touch the ground and you have to jump between pieces of furniture. And I just thought of it as a way to structure a composition with all of these figures getting up off the floor and using the furniture in an unconventional way. This is Drowsy, and it's a figure falling asleep on a glass coffee table. Danger. And this is Stone Tea Room. This painting, I believe I made for Freeze. And I'm just going to go to a detail here. This is a painting that I think it's about artist block and just about hesitation or fear to begin in general. It's this figure who is contorting himself, and one of his points of contact is this pencil on the paper. There's this kind of like manic energy when everything still exists in the air because you haven't made decisions and limited the variables yet. And the light fixture, I chose this kind of rainbow light fixture to look like a watercolor palette that hasn't been used yet. And so there's kind of this fresh, unopened quality that, that potential when you're unwilling to make choices in the studio. His glasses are here on the rock, and that's kind of an autobiographical note because I'm blind as a bat, and like if there were an apocalypse and I lost my glasses, I would not survive at all. It's like Velma in Scooby-Doo. But so you can see the glasses here. He's kind of going it blind, being the idea. This is another kind of silly but fun, large multi-figure composition. This stone texture was new for me at the time, and I just really wanted to use it. And so this painting was just this kind of cacophony. I wanted it to be this like cacophony of textures and all these different things going on, and the resistance band here between the figures is pulling attached between the two figures, and he's pulling his belt. So I just wanted all of these, directional things going on in the painting. And this lone figure back here is staring at himself in the mirror. This is late breakfast. And I had an earlier work as well that was using this, the idea of a figure acting like furniture. And similar to the scenic wallpaper, I found that the tray on the figure was a way to incorporate still life, very explicitly traditional still life things such as food and, that whole vanitas idea with Dutch still lifes and all that, but mixing it with the figure. And so it's from this bird's eye camera angle with the tray of food on top of the figure. When I took the reference photos for this, I put my phone on a timer and a chandelier and then would hit the timer and then run to the ground. But it was just a way to kind of incorporate these two different painting vocabularies into one work. This is Red Juror. This painting it was a lot of fun to paint, and it's kind of different for me. It's outside of the usual temperament of the figures, I guess. They usually aren't making eye contact and looking out of the painting. And I made this specifically for a group show that was inspired by the promotional materials for Eyes Wide Shut, which is kind of where it comes from. There was a pink mannequin in the window behind Tom Cruise, and I don't like to look at Tom Cruise, so I looked past him, and I was imagining, there's all these ceremonies and these hidden rites in the movie that are happening behind closed doors. And so I was imagining this figure as looking at you, the viewer, and kind of with this kind of haughty look, appraising you and maybe finding you wanting, by his expression. Oops, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I skipped forward a little bit. I've managed to avoid using Zoom during a lot of this pandemic, so you'll excuse my clumsiness with it. So this painting, this is a new body of work now. This was made for Frieze with the Breeder Gallery from Greece. This painting was kind of a turning point painting for me. It has a lot of the things from my previous works, like the scenic wallpaper, but the palette, you'll notice over time that the palette starts to become more muted. And I taught myself painting, and I think when I first started, I'm still excited about painting. I still love painting, but there was a lot of exuberance and a lot of Crayola colors at times. There's just this kind of excitement, and over time, the work has become a little more somber in tone. It's become more, I would say, complicated, like a little more complex, like there's more colors built into each part of it, but it's grown less bright. And so this work was kind of the first in that new series. The camera angle from this is taken from Night of the Living Dead. It's called The Witch. And I was thinking of, a witch traditionally is a female character, and it's a traditionally female character who has this relationship with, it's like sexuality and fear of the unknown and this kind of latent power. And I was imagining how that would function as a male character. And I wanted this kind of humorous thing where you don't know if it's just a boy who is sweeping and there's dust being kicked up in the air and there's nothing supernatural about it at all, or if he's actually a witch and is about to take off on the broom. So this is quite similar to the people working out from a couple paintings ago. I think there's about 1 year separating them, and you can see the the big change in the palette. It's a fun challenge for me to do these large multi-figure works. I was interested in using the primary color palette, but in this muted way, like toning it down. And what I was, sometimes I go into it with a specific idea about the figure or what the figure is doing, and sometimes it's more the setting that kind of pushes me forward. And this is definitely a setting painting. I was really excited about painting this infinity mirror here as well. So in the larger composition, you'll see that there's this rectangular mirror, or the circular mirror, excuse me, and then a circular mirror in the back. And so there's the infinity thing going on. With these glass and mirrors and flat planes where images are, is a chance for me to kind of play on the back and forth between painting and sculpture in the reliefs. When something is see-through in glass, in real life, it functions similar to a screen where you're seeing the image across a flat plane. As in this work, the edge of the mirror is carved and everything on both sides of it is painted, which becomes more explicit later on in more recent works. This is Bent Gardner. And in this piece, I was imagining this very devoted gardener who's bending backwards to shield his flowers, his little plot from the sun, and just this kind of like pure devotion. The plants on the outside are all wilting. And this is Lover's Leap. This was the first painting I made for PPOW Gallery, where I show now. It was for a group show last summer. So this piece is about romantic indecision and self-doubt. I was imagining the pose as a lover's leap. For starters, you'll see in the background there's this little landscape. A lover's leap is a promontory, some stone cliff, and they're often associated with like jilted lovers where one throws themselves to their death after they've been refused by their love. And I was imagining the pose for the figure as somebody who has already left and he's like splatted on the ground. And there's this pile of jumbled rocks down here near his hand. And he's plucked some out of the pile and is sorting them. And I was thinking about the way that, we as people read into situations, romantic or otherwise, and, the human mind tries to make a picture it likes. We try to impose order on things, whether those things be text messages or a pile of rocks. It brings us security to try to make order. And so he, has all these scattered thoughts in his head, and it's like focusing on this one little task to make things make sense. And in this, there's the two light sources that are hitting him from opposing sides and pretty cleanly dividing him in half into hot and colds, like with the legs in the bottom. And I wanted that to underline this feeling of like being pulled in two directions and just laying there and not knowing which way to go. So Lover's Leap, the previous painting, this painting I see as kind of like a direct reaction to that painting, which is often how it goes for me. When you have a new work, you set up this kind of set of parameters and variables, and you always think, well, what if I done this? What if I done that? And there's room to further flesh it out and, try it in a different way. So this is Into the Crevasse. The title of which is taken from 30 Rock for 30 Rock fans out there. But the idea was this this domestic space becoming, a site of danger or trouble. And, a crevasse is a ice cave, like a hole in the ice. and the figure has a sledgehammer. And so he's made this hole in the floor, and the only way through it is down. So he is standing on the edge and peering down with the light into the space below. Oh, excuse me. And this is from the same show. This is People's Parties. It's named after the Joni Mitchell song of the same name. I love Joni Mitchell, listening to her for a long time, since I was a young, angsty teenager. But, you know, the song is about going to a party and not feeling up to it and trying to put on your best face for other people and feeling overwhelmed and kind of having a hard time just like shrugging things off. And in the painting, he's naked in this kind of like, I mean, it could be at a party where people are naked at the party, but I was imagining it as this kind of dream logic, like the dream where, you know, you show up to class naked, that kind of cliche, where he's outside on this terrace and there's the people behind him who, you know, are smoking and laughing and having a good time. This is Reluctant Dancer, and it's kind of a similar piece to Bao, that painting of the dancer from the earlier show. Again, this idea of somebody, as if you like, imagining the painting as like a camera setup, and you push someone on frame and they don't want to be there, and they're kind of stuck like a deer in the headlights. And this piece is Vanity Never Ends. I was reading, and I listen to audiobooks nonstop when I'm painting. And I listen to the same ones over and over and over again, like ritualistically. And excuse me 1 second. I like to work against them. So I'll listen to the same book over and over and over again. And you can kind of tune in and tune out, and occasionally you get some good nuggets from it, and you know, you digest it in a different way each time. And it's this kind of way that you can turn your brain off but still be entertained. I found music is too distracting in the studio. There was an interview with some painter, I forget who, but she watches like a really crappy 1980s action movie. It's like Lethal Weapon or something, and she watches it over and over again in the studio, and it's the same thing to like have a foil to work against. But I bring that up because this painting was inspired by an excerpt from The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, which is a book I've listened to many times. And in the book, the narrator, it's kind of a framed story, and the narrator is this elderly woman, and she's getting driven home, and she falls asleep, and she realizes her mouth is open when she was sleeping, and she's very embarrassed, and she kind of realizes with chagrin that even though she's an elderly woman, she's still vain, and she's like frustrated by feeling this. She's frustrated by still feeling all these human emotions, even when she feels like she's progressed past them. And so I was thinking of kind of spiraling out from there. I was thinking of in The Sixth Sense, and when ghosts, after they're dead, you know, ghosts are portrayed in those stories as going about their daily lives and kind of caught in these ritual cycles and not knowing that they're dead. And I was wondering if a ghost would do all of the boring, mundane things as well that we take for granted, and it's just part of the joys and boring parts of being alive, like getting up and brushing your teeth and getting ready in the morning, rather than just, you know, haunting a specific person. Would they also, you know, brush their teeth in the morning? And it's also the ghost, I realized, was kind of perfect for the relief, because there's a lot of back and forth between what's carved and what's painted. And with the ghost, because they don't have any information on their surface, you know, all of the figure is carved in this. And, you know, usually things in the paintings can be made half out of relief, half out of paint, or entirely out of paint, but they're almost never made, you almost never see them mostly for the relief element. And because ghosts are plain and a kind of just distortion of space, they're the perfect thing to just use for the relief only. And it kind of makes an inherent like push and pull between what's made out of paint and what is made out of both paint and relief. This is the first piece I made for my show at PPOW that just closed. That was up from September to October. So I made all of the work for the show during COVID lockdown. So it was quite interesting, to say the least. It kind of dovetailed with some of the ideas I was working with before the world changed so much, but it was a breakup album of sorts. And, you know, part of the show was about this idea of, confinement and freedom and fear of both. And, kind of surrendering to these larger forces and feelings in your life that you feel like maybe are out of your control. And this piece is called Bolt. And it's unclear if the figure himself is, bolting, leaving, or if he's just looking out the door. And there's obviously a bolt on the doorknob as well. So there's kind of a double entendre with the title. This piece was made this is Boyan Table. And this was made kind of at the height of COVID confinement mania, which, as we all know, comes and goes over time. But, just this figure who I was just imagining this kind of hyperactive figure who's ready to get up and do something, but there's nowhere to go and nothing to do. And he's kind of bouncing off the walls and, he's just upside down on top of the breakfast table. This is Headlights. And this I kind of see as a sequel to this. I see as a sequel to this work. It's this is a smaller work on board, and Headlights as a relief. So as a way to go a little bigger and more complex with it. The painting is set up as a system of pairs. So there's the two headlights, the two pieces of lemon at the bottom, the two tables, the counter and the table that are paired. And it's unclear if he is barricading the door to stop something from getting in or is trying to get out. And as he's in the headlight, he's the only thing that's not paired. And so the open door that's in the second headlight, I wanted to have this kind of implied that there's someone on the other side of the door, or that there's something else going on there, as it's like a spot waiting to be filled where everywhere else in the painting has its match, like its other half. This is reading. Before COVID really became a reality, when it was just on the periphery, in January, I went on a trip for my 30th birthday, and I was looking at geotags, and I just noticed this weird recurring thing where there were people pretending to read, and I don't know how else to say it except that, but there's like people sitting poolside and holding a book like this, like to show off their fingernails, or just holding it in all these like awkward contorted ways. And it's very much this kind of monetization of everything that happens because of social media, where you want to appear cultured and intelligent, and on top of that, it has this like class thing as well, where it's like I'm on vacation in this beautiful locale, but I'm like so unbothered that I'm buried in my book, and so there's kind of like an inherent humor to me, and who took that photo? Like, were you like reading a book and then your person you went on a trip took? And it just seems very like staged and artificial. So that was where I got the idea for the painting. And this is me in the studio pretending to be productive. You know, it's there's like this empty toolbox at the bottom, and you'd obviously get more done reading the book just sitting on the chair, but it's just kind of like mugging for the camera and feeling like, you know, putting out this output. I took somebody through my show who said they thought that it looked like a gay spider who'd come across in the basement, and I can't stop thinking of it as a gay spider, and that's that's how I think of it now. But this is Window, and this painting, if you'll remember, is this is it painted, and I'm just going to go back to the first slide, which is this is it unpainted. So this is one of the ones where the relief is really crucial to the way you read the work. And you know, when you look through a window, it's you're seeing things through glass and it's all flat. And then the actual siding on the house, the tree, the window pane have carved dimension. And so looking at this painting, it's kind of like a framing device for the action inside. And when you see it as an image on a computer, you know, it's not really clear exactly what is carved and what isn't. But in this one, the relief, you know, does some lifting narratively. It kind of reinforces this like voyeuristic vibe of looking through the window at this person who's laying on the ground contentedly. And the camera angle, you know, doesn't really add up. Like there's a spigot on the wall, which implies that it's a ground floor, and you're like floating above. So it's the camera angle is a little bizarre, and I kind of wanted it to feel like off kilter and kind of put you on the ropes as a viewer. This is Carless Driver. My brother made the name for it. He's studying to be a lawyer and he's a wordsmith, but this is another like COVID mania painting, but you know, I was just imagining this kind of supernatural Matilda-ish, everything lifting up, and he's pretending to drive a car. The pose is kind of implying, you know, that he's like escaping and leaving, but there's nothing there. This kind of invisible car, supernatural moment. This is Fiddler. It's kind of my Titanic painting, which is my favorite movie growing up, and I used to spend all of my time drawing like cross sections of it and sinking models of it in the pool. But the kind of two North Stars for this painting were Fiddler, Nero fiddling while Rome burns, and the band playing on the deck of the Titanic. And it's just about trying to mentally figure out how to keep making work while the world feels like it's falling apart. And this is Coyote. This is not a relief, nor was the Carless Driver, the green figure. This is just acrylic on wooden panel. As I started in sculpture, it's taken me some time to grow confident enough to just paint on a flat surface, because the painting and sculpture are so enmeshed with each other that it took a while to be able to just do painting without it being part of a sculptural process. But this was also named after the Joni Mitchell song Coyote. But it's about this, you know, there's this figure stumbling home drunk, but I wanted there to be this kind of, I'd never done a floor extending back, and I was really excited to paint it with this kind of cinematic like fade to black in the background. And you know, if he's stumbling home drunk and turning off the lamp, there's kind of a question of why he's in such a big room, and there's this kind of eerie, like what is just beyond frame vibe. Sorry for saying vibe. And this is Dirt God. One of the strands running through the show was this idea of experiencing the world through just your body and just surrendering, you know, kind of letting go of all of your baggage and just just being there physically and not getting caught up in you know, the drama. And so this figure is just experiencing the ground. I was just thinking of that feeling of like, you know, sticking your hand in the dirt and that really tactile feeling. My friend has a toddler and she loves playing in the dirt and she calls her daughter Dirt God, and that's where the name is from. And this is like something flying. And this as well it's a similar theme as Dirt God. One of the books I listen to on rotation is the Southern Reach trilogy, which was made into the inferior adaptation Annihilation. But one of the ideas is that, you know, there's this kind of alien force. I won't spoil it for you if you choose to read, but that's kind of overtaking humans and, you know, they're getting dissolved back into nature. And it's both scary and beautiful. This kind of feeling of surrendering that comes with a sense of ecstasy or joy. And this is a second ghost painting. It's just predicated on the simple idea of a ghost transmutes walls and they don't need to take the elevator. So it's a pretty simple joke, but. And this is Waiting. This is another piece that is on wood panel, is all flat. And it's this line of the two dogs and the boy. And I was imagining all three of them cocking their heads as dogs do and looking out the window, expecting something to come. This is False Start. And I was imagining this figure who is getting ready to strike out and go on an adventure, you know, head out into the world. He's on this front porch and he's stood still for so long that snow was accumulated on his shoulders and his head. And so there's this, he's made a big, brave decision, but hasn't pulled the trigger. And he's just standing there accumulating snow. I was inspired by, I was looking at statues by Mayol, and I think there was one in Paris, and it had a bunch of snow accumulated on it. And it was such a beautiful contrast between this figure with, you know, no human would stand still long enough for a snow bridge to accumulate on their nose, around their head. And there's this strange moment where you see a life-sized figure covered in snow, and it's this very surreal thing because a human would, you know, get cold or shuffle their shoulders and knock it off them. So there's kind of like surreal moment to it. This is Backseat. And this is another setting painting. I had been thinking of making a painting in a backseat of a car for a long time, just as this really great framing device that it makes around the edges of the panel. I think I'll revisit this one day as the car it lends itself really beautifully to the relief, I think. And so I think of this as kind of like a dry run for that maybe. And so that everything previously was selected works from my show at PPOW. And these last two are works that I've made in the wilderness after the show. I'm preparing right now for a solo show in June, and I'm just kind of getting ideas together and making some new sets of variables that, you know, I want to try. One of them is to have the people be more clothed, I think, just so that there's more of an inherent, when they're nude, I want them to be nude for a reason. So this is Sunflower at Night. And I was thinking of, you know, sunflowers are heliotropic and they follow the sun. And I was wondering what a sunflower would look at night, which direction it would point. Would it wait for the sun to come back up in the morning, or would it just, you know, stare off in any direction? And he's, you know, like bent down looking at it as if, I thought there was a kind of funny thing where the like human speed that we expect things to happen at. And, you know, if you've ever seen those amazing Planet Earth videos of plants growing in the forest, they appear quite sentient the way they move when you see it sped up, but it's on like a whole different time scale from what humans can understand. And so even if the plant is moving towards its final destination, he doesn't know which way it is. And this is the last piece. I finished this on Sunday, so it's very recent. This called Streetlights, and I've been looking at 1930s German painting. I love Christian Schad especially, and they have he used a lot of these kind of city backdrops, and they're often society portraits, and it seems very much, there's no real indication that they're not real. You know, there's nothing saying that it's fake, but there isn't much of an attempt to make it look like they're actually in the city either. It feels very much like they painted a city portrait, or they painted his portrait and then they dropped in a city backdrop or a type of Bruegelish landscape or what have you. And so I was kind of interested in straddling that line, and urban landscape is not something I've done a lot before. And I think it's something that I might have more of in this upcoming show. So yeah, so that's all the slides, and thank you everyone for listening. And I think we're going to open up for Q&A now.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. That was wonderful to see the span of your work and the growth that you've shown over the years. So now everybody, if you have a question for Kyle, you can enter it in the Q&A chat box. We already have a few questions. And I will go ahead and we have a lot of young artists in the audience, and everybody is searching for their own style, you know, their own unique style that marks them as an artist. And one of the questions is, how did you come to find your art style?
By making a lot of ugly paintings for a long time. It really took a long time. I had 6 or 7 years of working full time, you know, and I'd come back to the studio after hours, and it takes a long time. The photographer, Mark McWright, whose work is wonderful, he recently said in an interview, and I'm roughly paraphrasing, that the best artists aren't great geniuses, they're curious and diligent, I think is what he said. And I don't know if I've always measured up to that standard, but it's something I've been trying to keep in my head. I think it really takes diligence, and you know, you have to, I should draw more than I do now, but it takes a lot of, you know, just repetition. And it's maybe a cliche answer, but I think it's true. So yeah.
So I have a question about your process, and I think you alluded to it briefly there. Because you use this relief, right? That doesn't really look for a lot of, you know, transition as you paint. Like most painters are like, this does not belong here, I'm going to put it here now. So do you have to do a lot of planning? You know, you have some very elaborate shadows a lot of the times. How do you get everything so accurate? What's your process at the beginning?
I do a lot of planning, yes. I've kind of learned over time that I never carve hands in the, you know, when I've kind of learned over time that like cloth, you can have really fine detail in because it's these kind of flowy, like flowy curves that suit themselves really well to carving. But when you get down to things like fingers or hair, things that, you know, are naturally change a lot and that you don't want to lock yourself in with too much information carving, I have the figures kind of bleeding into the backdrop so that it gives me a little bit of flexibility for what I do with the hands or those kind of things. I do occasionally get caught out where I think, I wish I could change this or that, and I can't, and it's very frustrating. So I plan a lot, and these new works that I'm doing on board have been so refreshing because, you know, it's maybe like a 2-week process of, I bring several of the relief panels through the sculpture part at once, and the painting on wooden panels, I can get an idea and start painting that night. And it's it's very satisfying, and I can change anything at any time, and it feels so free. So it's something I'm going to continue to do in tandem, because I also feel like to keep growing as a painter, I need to produce more quickly. And the sculpture is an important part of my practice, but I also want the painting to keep growing. So yeah.
Wonderful. Our next question from Annabeth Rosen, our chair. Wondering about your interest in 1930s and 40s movies, color, light, and shadow narrative, and the painting of Thomas Hart Benton and Dorothea Tanning, especially the surreal, erotic imagery of Tanning, sensual at that time. Can you speak more to
that? I do like some of Tanning's work. I think I've gotten compared to Tamara de Lempicka a lot, and I think she's amazing. I was initially drawn to, I'll address the full breadth of the question, but for Tamara's work and a lot of 1930s painting, I think I was initially drawn to it because they have this way of depicting flesh in all objects that feels very metallic. And the way that I show light in paintings is often, there's like a gradient wrapping around something from extreme highlight to extreme low light. And it feels like Tamara's work almost feels like the women are made out of like a low luster metal, like they feel metallic. And that's kind of a 1930s metropolis culture-wide thing. I've always loved interior design, and there's something about, you know, the 1930s interior design I definitely love. I love 1930s and 1940s largely because I love the, I think I love the visual language of the photography of it as well. They're hand painted, like daguerreotypes, I think that's what they're called. But you know, like if you've seen old photos of your family where like maybe your great aunt is like her makeup and the background are painted in afterwards. And they're this kind of weird photography with this human touch, and they feel quite painterly. And I'm just interested in making this kind of like queer, fantastic world. And there's like an inherent glamour to the 1930s that I love. So yeah. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
So our next question comes from Jasmine Pomar. At times your work explores this boundary of queer masculinity and images of Americana, even contrasting queer sensuality with hegemonic masculinities. Do you draw from the intertwined histories of gay men aligning with authoritative figures, like the fascination with policemen and beefcake imagery?
No, I don't think I do. Wait, could you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, we can spend some time unpacking it. At times your work explores this boundary of queer masculinity and images in Americana, even contrasting queer sensuality with hegemonic masculinities. Do you draw from the intertwined histories of gay men aligning with authoritarian figures, like a fascination with policemen and beefcake imagery?
I don't think that I draw from those stereotypes too much. I had that home reno painting that was, you know, playing off of that type of macho character, but I think that was, I was younger then. I think it was from like early 2018, but over time it's become, you know, it's mostly photos of, it's based on photos of me and, you know, my ex and who I'm with now. And I don't know if I'm really using authority figures like that, I think, but I would be interested to hear a follow-up question maybe from her.
One panelist would like to, if you could repeat the Joni Mitchell title you mentioned. I remember, but I'll let you.
So I mentioned Coyote and People's Parties. They're both great. Are they both from Hydra?
No,
People's Parties is from
Hydra. Yes.
Spotify's kind of collapsed my album knowledge where it's all mixed together now, but yeah, those are the two songs and they're both wonderful.
Do you draw inspiration from any other music? I know you said that you like to you don't listen to music, but it seems like you were referencing Joni a lot. Is there anyone else you reference in your paintings, or?
I used to reference Patsy Cline. My mom loves Patsy Cline, and I remember her walk around the house singing like crazy, you know. But my yeah, I don't listen to music that much anymore. I mean, it's COVID times, but I find it too distracting in the studio. Like it's too energizing. I feel like I need to be like in a calmer. There's kind of like a hypnotic quality to listening to books on tape or just somebody talking, and music. It makes my brain too active, but in maybe the wrong part of my brain. Yeah.
I understand that. Okay, so one more question from Amanda Thomas. Considering the sometimes restrictive materials of sculpture as far as altering structure and overall shape in the middle of making a piece, do you think your background in sculpture led you to being more of a planner as a painter? Or do you think that is more reflective of you as an individual and your approaches to other things?
Definitely reflective of me as an individual, I think. I just moved into a new apartment and I made a Photoshop rendering of where I was going to put the couch. So that's just the kind of person I am. I plan a lot. And yeah, it is definitely a lot of work with the sculpture, and I'm looking forward to having kind of a split practice where I make just flat paintings that, you know, are more organic and where I can experiment more with the painting side of it. I think for the time being, I see myself still doing the sculpture, but I think it's going to be more of a mix. And I also make a lot of graphite drawings that play a part in the planning process. And I've always meant to show them, and I always say that I'm going to, and then the next show comes around and I don't. And so I'd like to flesh that out as its own body of work one day, but it just hasn't felt like the right time yet. It took me a long time to study painting, and when I go to the art store and look through all the different kinds of paper, it gives me heartache. It's just too much. So I need someone to explain paper to me, maybe.
You mean drawing paper?
Yeah, there's just so many kinds, and they buckle and you get them dirty.
The first place to start is hot or cold press.
Yeah, let's have a talk off the.
Sure, we can talk tomorrow during the studio visits.
Sure, that would be great.
I'm still interested in hearing more about your sculpture, because it always interests me when an artist starts somewhere and then they kind of divert and, you know, start 3-dimensional and go to 2-dimensional, or vice versa. Like, what did your sculptures look like? What's the relationship between your paintings now? Was it similar subject matter, colors? Just curious what those used to look like. Did they have like a relief thing? What?
Yeah, so when I first moved to New York, I started carving sculpture just as a easy thing you could do in your own apartment or what have you. And they were abstract. They were abstract sculptures that they were like kind of carved channels. Something similar to, you know, like if you went like this with your fingers in mud, those kind of channels. But I would carve these patterns out of them, and they sometimes referenced landscape, or, you know, like I thought of them as like landscape through the rain on their best days. They always were painted and had a kind of interest in the surface, but I just didn't know how to mix paint yet. And I found you know, I've always been a big reader. I've always loved like Heartbreak Album. I've always loved movies. I love storytelling. And I felt kind of adrift when I was making abstract work. Like I just didn't know how to connect, or how to make some things that I felt like personally compelled to continue to make, and that I thought people would get something out of or care about. And when I started making figurative work, and it was about, you know, the people I cared about, and, you know, my feelings about this or that felt true, it was just like affirming for me. And I had been drawing on the side figuratively and then making these abstract sculptures. And then when I started to combine them, things started to click into place. but that took a long time. I'm glad in retrospect because I learned about how to use those materials that I eventually brought to the figurative stuff.
So if anyone has any more questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. I will continue with a few of mine. I was wondering, do you see your work as political? Are you challenging, I think you are challenging the status quo with your presentations of, or breaking gender norms. If you want to speak to that a little.
Sure. I mean, I think, everything is political, but I don't think that it's world-changingly political, but I know, things are so different now too for young kids growing up. I know I sound like an old fogey saying that, but growing up, there wasn't a lot of gay representation in the world, or certainly none that I saw in suburban Michigan. And it's a pleasure for me to be making these kind of images just because, they would have done me good when I was younger, and, they wouldn't have made me feel like, I went to like a all football type of, rah-rah school. Yeah, so I think it's maybe political in that sense. And, often, yeah, it's just how men are allowed to be depicted. And yeah.
We have a question from Caden. Hello, Kyle. Thank you for sharing your work with us. It's very beautiful. I was wondering if you could give any tips/advice for formulating the concepts in your work into conversation talk like this one. Yeah, it's been such a wonderful talk. Yeah, how do you take the work and, put it in a conversation style and talk about all these concepts? Tips, advice.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. One thing that I don't know if this is too idiosyncratic to help, but I have like folders, and when I get a rough idea for something, I start collecting images of literally anything and that can be, I'm always taking my camera roll, I'm like always running out of cloud storage because I'm just taking reference photos everywhere all the time, and finding things on Tumblr, and finding things all over, and I'm like constantly sorting them into these like little mini ideas, and sometimes they never turn into something where they become just a corner of a painting. But I think these kind of hypotheticals are really helpful for me. Like if you just have some what if sentences, and your painting is maybe trying to answer that hypothetical question, or the painting itself is the question. I just wrote down a list of like, I'm kind of trying to do like an exquisite corpse thing for myself. And I wrote down like 50 activities, and I'm like taking 3 of them out of a hat. And then I want to have a person who's like doing 3 of them. It's based on a Dana Schutz series that she had a person doing 3 verbs at the same time, but I don't think they're going to make them into final works probably, but it's just it's just a fun way to like, put 2 non sequiturs together that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise. So those are some little exercises that I've been doing to get ideas.
Next question. So do you ever feel blocked in the studio, and do you have any advice for how to like unblock for all of us artists who might be hitting that winter?
I feel blocked all the time. I mean, I've multiple paintings in this that were about like hesitation and fear to begin, it's often about painting. It's hard, I should draw more than I do. I am the kind of person who goes in boom and bust cycles where I put off work, and then I love all-nighters, and I love like for my last show, the show before my last show, I pulled like 2 all-nighters in a row, and I love it. And I know it's not healthy and it's not a great way to live for anyone in my life or me. So better time management would be great, but what I've been trying to do is draw every day, and it's yet to be seen if that will cure artist block. But I put off working for a long time, and then when I start working, I have like lots of ideas, and it's one painting kind of begets another painting, like they're birthing new ideas. And I always kick myself because when I'm in those phases, I feel like I don't write or draw enough of it down, because then the next time that I'm working, I wish I had more of them on hand. And so with this new show coming up, when I'm in the more productive part, I'm going to try to still draw every day, even though I'm working on a deadline for different work, so that the next time, the next show I have, and I might think the ideas are stupid then or irrelevant, or I might feel like I already addressed those ideas in this show, but it's just getting ideas down, and don't get too distracted by TV, even though there's lots of great TV, and I do get too distracted by it sometimes. So.
Okay, I'll ask our final question for the evening, and it's, I think, a kind of a cliche final question. I love to see your the last paintings of the ones more outside and the paintings in nature. Do you think you're going to continue on this path? What are your plans for the work in the future?
I have a couple, like I was saying, this last show was largely soul figures, people alone, and that was thematically right, and it was how I felt emotionally, like in my head about things, and this kind of echo chamber. And I have one sketch already for two people together, and this show I'm kind of giving myself a lot of assignments. So I want a piece that's largely monochromatic, or whatever the term is for two colors. I want a crazy rainbow piece that's like every color and it's totally bombastic. Often, the last show I have, I kind of want to turn 90 degrees and go in the opposite direction for the next show. And this last show had a lot of open areas without texture, because I'd done so much texture before. And so I think these new paintings are going to be some multi-figure cacophony things, is all I know at this point. Yeah.
Well, we got a few more questions, so I might fudge that last.
Sure, that's fine.
There's a question about showing paintings in a gallery space, and I think it's interesting. How many paintings do you recommend showing? I know it depends on how big the space is and how big the paintings are and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to actually putting a show up and some logistics of that?
Sure. I guess the scale of them is important. One thing, when I was younger, I had a tendency to want to overhang and to put too much work in a show. And, I think there's a real, it's kind of a confidence projected by having a not super overhung show, that feels very like, this is it, like, this is where you should be looking. So that's something, I work with my gallery on. I don't have studio assistants, so I'm often, I do everything, and I'm not in a position right now where I'll ever have too much work for a show. Like, I just can't make too much work, so it's not something I've had to think about. But I think, if the show does well, people will buy the pieces from the show that even aren't hung, the backroom pieces. So don't feel like you need to put, if you have 3 paintings that are very similar, maybe pick the best one and have it in the front, and the other ones your dealer can sell anyway. So
that's an excellent insider point. Okay, Kyle, I think we'll wrap it up there. We all thank you for being our guest at UC Davis, and we all look forward to seeing what you do in the future. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And stay tuned for Rita Gonzalez next week. And let's all say goodnight to Kyle. Thank you, Kyle.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Night.